Obviously thou commandest that I should be continent from the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Thou commandest me to abstain from fornication, and as for marriage itself, thou hast counselled something better than what thou dost allow. And since thou gavest it, it was done, even before I became a minister of thy sacrament. But there still exist in my memory, of which I have spoken so much, the images of such things as my habits had fixed there. These things rush into my thoughts with no power when I am awake, but in sleep they rush in not only so as to give pleasure, but even to obtain consent in what very closely resembles the deed itself. Indeed, the illusion of the image prevails to such an extent in both my soul and my flesh that the illusion persuades me when sleeping to what the reality cannot do when I am awake. Am I not myself at such a time, O Lord my God? And is there so much of a difference between myself awake and myself in the moment when I pass from waking to sleeping or return from sleeping to waking? Where then is the power of reason which resists such suggestions when I am awake? For even if the things themselves be forced upon it, I remain unmoved. Does reason cease when the eyes close? Is it put to sleep with the bodily senses? But in that case, how does it come to pass that even in slumber we often resist, and with our conscious purposes in mind, continue most chastely in them, and yield no assent to such allurements? Yet there is at least this much difference, that when it happens otherwise in dreams, when we wake up, we return to peace of conscience. And it is by this difference between sleeping and waking that we discover that it was not we who did it, while we still feel sorry that in some way it was done in us. Is not thy hand, O Almighty God, able to heal all the diseases of my soul, and by thy more and more abundant grace to quench even the lascivious motions of my sleep?
I've been missing the way you touch me, baby. Kisses on my neck and the love you gave me. When I think about it, I go a little bit crazy. It's gotta be more than this for you and I to coexist. Help me, I wanna be more than just a friend. I'm looking for closure.
Those are the words of St. Augustine, who many consider to have written one of the first works of Alto theory. In his work Confessions, he divulged deeply personal conflicts he had between the sinful workings of his unconscious mind and his conscious mind's shame over his inability to control these thoughts, feelings, and desires. The oniric world, or the dreaming world, is a deeply personal world. It contains both mimesis and absurdity, with some viewing it as an extension of reality and others as a portal to a world with no connection whatsoever to our own. Any effort to discuss dreams intellectually stumbles upon the problem that in a world so personal, the only witness we can ever have of our oniric experiences is ourselves. Because dreams are confined to this deeply personal psychical reality, a reality which poses so many problems in understanding, there exists no other choice but to bring one's own dreams into evidence, to compare them with others, and to try to understand the dream world and the implications it has on our waking world. This departs from so much of modern scientific practice, where generally speaking, the only truths that are believed are truths that can be rigorously tested and examined objectively. But there's very little objective about dreams. We can only share what goes on inside our brains and hope that we're believed. Now, like Augustine, when I was just a young teen, just starting to go through puberty, I was deeply, intensely religious. And I too had a dream that felt a little bit at odds with my religious faith. I imagined that a boy that I had a little bit of a crush on was, to put it academically, the absolute out of me. Now, growing up in the church, I used to pray every single night that Jesus would be the author of my dreams. So needless to say, I was a little bit confused. Either God wanted me to see what I saw, or he wasn't powerful enough to manipulate my unconscious dreams, or he doesn't exist. But this video is not about that conversation. Like Augustine, I believed God was real. I believed he was powerful enough to do something about my dreams. And I too was confused that even while being really pious in my waking life, he would let my unconscious be such a damn freak. So what the fuck is going on with dreams? You know who you are as your conscious self, but who's your unconscious self? What's going on in there? Let's talk about dreams. According to Mr. Sigmund Freud, we all have a psychic apparatus where dreams are produced. This production starts at what he refers to as the first agency of wish construction. Then later on, our dreams are subjected to a second agency, which then condenses and censors our dreams, resulting in what he refers to as our manifest dream content. And then finally, the dream ends up in the third agency, which is our waking agency, our conscious mind, which has to then interpret and decipher what our dream was trying to tell us. Now, there's a lot of psychoanalytic cocaine-fueled jargon here, but in essence, his theory is that every single dream you have conveys a wish. Literally every single one. If you dream that you're drinking tea and then the tea runs out, it's because you're horny and you're not getting enough sex. If you have a nightmare and you wake up screaming, don't worry, because that nightmare, it was concealing a wish. It's something that you wanted. And if you think this sounds like any other form of woo-woo new age dream interpretation, you're wrong. When Freud does it, it's science. Because
historically, for one's work to be considered intellectual and critical, as a philosopher, historian, critic, or professor, one had to have an air of objective authority. Men who are Euro-American, upper class, not racialized, and at least heterosexual passing, tended to be granted the kinds of objective authority required, while women, people of color, indigenous people, poor and working class people, were historically abjected from that realm because of their assumedly uncritical, hypersubjectivity and embodiment. The very notion of theoretical abstraction, of a vacuumed rigor that exists for its own ends and apart from any particular body, is a masculine, even macho and white colonialist ideal.
But we'll get into that more later. For now, for the purposes of part 1 of this video, we are going to try our very, very hardest to take this man seriously. So, every single dream that we have is a wish. You have your manifest dream content, which is the dream that you actually see. And then you have your latent dream content, which is what's concealing the wish. This is essentially the real dream, and it's being disguised by your manifest dream content. Basically, your unconscious is censoring itself, and we have to interpret how. Freud provides an example where a journalist really wants to critique the leaders of his own country, but then he instead critiques the leaders of a foreign country.
The political writer, who has unpleasant truths to tell those in power, moderates and disguises the expression of his opinions.
Now, this is about as political as Freud ever gets.
The mytho-psychological tales picked up by Freud and raised to the rank of science by Lacan are simply local stories, tales of the patriarchal, colonial European mind, tales used to legitimize the sovereign power of the white father over all other bodies. Psychoanalysis is an ethnocentrism that refuses to recognize its political position.
The thing is, Freud recognizes that socio-political pressures will affect dreamers in so much that overtly sexual latent content might be turned into super mundane manifest content because of shame. But then he completely fails to take that any further without recognizing his own political and cultural biases. Like, yes, the latent content is gonna get censored, but we're censoring all the time. Your waking interpretation of the dream is gonna be censored by shame too. Our entire reality is warped and influenced by our political understandings and socio-cultural upbringing.
There is no body outside of power. The materiality of the body, indeed materiality itself, is produced by and in direct relation to the investment of power.
Power is something that we internalize and inhabit, and it's going to affect not just our unconscious thoughts, but our waking thoughts and our very being as well. It influences the way in which the world is interpreted to us, the very intake of information that comes into our first agency to even create wish fulfillment in the first place. Each of us has a blind spot in between our eyes, which is at every single second of our lives omitting a small piece of empirical reality, which will never even reach our first agency. That piece of reality is there, it exists, we simply don't see it. In the same way that I might spot a color and tell you, objectively this color is red, but you might say, well, not to me. We all have our own idea of what our reality is. We all perceive our reality as objective, but there's nothing really objective about it because we're perceiving it, and all of us might be intaking slightly different information.
The regime of sex, gender, and sexual difference you consider universal, on which rests all psychoanalytical theory, is not an empirical reality. It is in fact a performative engine that produces and legitimizes a specific political and economic order, which is used by society to decide what is true and to distinguish it from what is false, and, therefore, who should be considered human and under what conditions.
When we see a human body, we tend to place that body into male or female without even consciously making that decision. Consciously, we're not necessarily interested in this artifact of data, but gendering bodies is a part of the way that reality itself is written into our unconscious. I've spoken on this channel before about Ursula K. Le Guin's book, The Left Hand of Darkness. It's a sci-fi world where there's a group of inhabitants called the Cathenians who are all bisexual or sexless depending on how you view it. They inhabit male or female only temporarily to procreate.
A man wants his virility regarded, a woman wants her femininity appreciated, however indirect and subtle the indications of regard and appreciation. Here, one is respected and judged only as a human being. It is an appalling experience.
In a world where the initial realm of perception carries such different connotations to our own, what censorship would then crop up in the second agency? Maybe for the Cathenians, there's an entirely different realm of shame. Maybe the Cathenians have shame dreams about how that they wish that they could fuck more. Maybe the Cathenians would have dreams about how they wish that they could be confined to a single sex for their entire life. How crazy would that be? In Le Guin's world of fantasy, we can only hypothesize about what psychical process the Cathenians would experience in dreams. But here we're talking about fantasy, and dreams aren't, strictly speaking, fantasy. Freud describes dreams as often appearing to us as alien, but strictly speaking, this world is not entirely alien to us because it's being produced by our own unconscious, by a biological process of our own making. If we think again about that blind spot in between our eyes, that blind spot only exists in our conscious waking experience of the world. Our unconscious and our conscious don't have the same point of view, so what appears as alien and fantasy to our conscious understandings of the world and our conscious perception of our dreams is totally normal to our unconscious. I know I'm getting a little bit metaphysical here, and it's gonna get worse, but walk with me.
The stricter the domination of the censorship, the more thorough becomes the disguise, and often enough, the more ingenious the means employed to put the reader on the track of the actual meaning.
Here's the thing. If censorship operates as Freud believes it does, where it's stronger in the waking life than in our unconscious, it seems likely to me that the more thorough the disguise is actually happening in our waking life. Philosopher Paul Preciado describes a lot of our conventional understandings of the world as epistemes, or systems of knowledge. So we have all of these different epistemes built into our perception of reality, like with the gendering of bodies, or assuming capitalism to be an artifact of the world we live in, as opposed to a historical, man-made system which is not at all universal. Like, sometimes I will dream that I've won a lot of money, or that I've been given some huge mansion. And obviously that dream depends entirely on a capitalistic episteme. If there was no money, and if I had no concept of money as being part of reality, then I wouldn't have that dream. Alto talks a lot about what he refers to as the epistemology of sex and gender in the world. It's this largely invented system of knowledge which formulates our entire reality, but it's not indicative of what reality is, objectively, empirically.
The more one is occupied with the solution of dreams, the readier one becomes to acknowledge that the majority of the dreams of adults deal with sexual material and give expression to erotic wishes. No other instinct has had to undergo so much suppression from the time of childhood onwards as the sexual instinct in all its numerous components. From no other instincts are there so many and such intense unconscious wishes left over, which now, in the sleeping state, generate dreams. Of many dreams, it may be ascertained by careful interpretation that they may even be understood bisexually, inasmuch as they yield an indisputable overinterpretation in which they realize homosexual impulses. That is, impulses which are contrary to the normal sexual activity of the dreamer. But that all dreams are to be interpreted bisexually seems to me to be a generalization as insusceptible of proof as it is improbable.
One of Freud's clients comes to him with this dream where she has a candlestick which breaks. And according to Freud, this could have no other possible interpretation than that this dream is about impotence, because the candle is an object which excites the female genitals. Science! Now, I have a few issues with this. For one thing, Freud is a man, and obviously from his perspective, penetration is like this holy thing which must be preserved. So when he sees something even remotely phallic break, it's obviously a dick reference. Like, bro, this is your wish fulfillment. Not everything stick-shaped has to be a penis. It doesn't. I've never seen a candlestick and thought it was a dick. I've never thought that. If I was interpreting this dream, I would probably first employ Occam's razor, because sometimes it's not that deep. Maybe the candlestick just broke. If I have to take this as a phallic reference, I could potentially assume that she wanted it to break. Most women don't come from penetration alone. And if you were to speak to a woman about this dream, you would know that there are a few reasons a girl might actually want her man's dick to not work. This is the 1800s. There are some reasons why a girl might want her man's dick to not work. I'm just saying there are other possible interpretations here. Freud writes that if a woman dreams of drowning, it means she's dreaming about giving birth. But if a man is drowning, it means something else. I'm just obsessed with the fact that if a girl comes to him with the most random dream about some random mundane shit, he's like, I know for a fact this is about how she wants to. And then if a man comes to him and he's like, yeah, so I dreamt about having hardcore bareback with my best mate, Freud's like, well, that's not the normal sexual activity of the dreamer, so it's definitely not about sex. They were roommates. Here's the thing. I obviously think Freud is wrong. I think the dreams are, in the 1800s usage of the word bisexual. I think they're bisexual as fuck. It's our waking world which has the bias of men don't have sex with other men, and the only reason a woman could possibly be frustrated with a broken candlestick is because she's horny for men. Our dream selves are, generally speaking, quite bisexual. We often see ourselves in gender atypical roles, both sexually and otherwise. And this can obviously be really stressful when you wake up and you're like, that's not how men and women are supposed to be. This is something that I can obviously relate to a lot. The dream I mentioned at the start of this video was where I experienced an epistemological shattering as an adolescent. I woke up and I was like, what the fuck? And I spent a long time trying to justify this dream to myself and to reassure myself that I wasn't a horrible person for having had it.
We may compare a dream to a screen on which the unconscious projects its inner drama. We see there the various inner personalities that make up much of our total character, the dynamics among the forces that make up the unconscious.
This quote suggests that dreams are like a pluralism of the inner self and reality. They create many different versions of reality and they unveil many different versions of the self, all of which adhere to a certain temporal ambiguity. I definitely feel like my dream self is a whole collection of different persons and characters, drawing on different material throughout my life. When I transitioned from male to female, I had this weird thing happen where my dream self would sometimes just still be a man. I kind of felt like I was in a sitcom where the producers forgot that the titular character had been recast, and it was just very confusing and weird and gender bendy and all over the place. In my waking life, I was watching myself become more feminine and more confident in my womanhood, and then I'd fall asleep and my dream self was like, yeah, let me remind you of everything that you used to hate about yourself. It was fun. It was a great time. This doesn't happen to me very often anymore, but it still does every once in a while. And I feel like it's kind of the opposite of Freud's theory. The wish is being taken away. I've already manifested the wish in my waking life. My waking life is happy and living shame-free and authentically. And then my unconscious is yeah, remember when we didn't do all that? Remember when we were filled with shame? I think Freud's wish theory is bad, if you haven't figured that out already. I think it's unfalsifiable. But obviously Freud is not the only philosopher coming up with theories about dreams. Descartes believed that you could not even be certain that there was a veil between the waking and sleeping self at all.
Well, dreams, they feel real while we're in them, right? It's only when we wake up that we realize something was actually strange. Let me ask you a question. You never really remember the beginning of a dream, do you? You always wind up right in the middle of what's going on.
I guess, yeah.
So how did we end up here?
Well, we just came from the,
Think about it, Ariadne. How did you get here?
Thank you for creating Inception, Descartes. At any moment, we could potentially be dreaming. This provoked a lot of questions are we dreaming now? Is there an ethical dimension to dreams? Are we bound, morally speaking, as adolescent me had feared, to our actions carried out in our dreams, lucid or otherwise? If we can lucid dream, does that mean that we possess agency in our behavior and therefore responsibility? Even if these things don't really happen, if you choose to do something terrible lucidly in your dreams, are you a bad person? According to Preciado, dreams are merely another plane of truth. The oniric world is no more or less valid than the waking world. So if I dream, and that version of myself has totally different values to my waking self, then that version of myself with those values does indeed exist within my psychical reality. It may not be observable to other people, but that doesn't mean it's not real.
The human psyche never stops creating and dealing with reality, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in waking life.
But if we believe Freud, dreams exist only to be the subject of our waking agency, which interprets whatever wishes our unconscious is trying to tell us. So the only insight that a dream can ever possibly offer to Freud is the wish that's trying to be communicated. This means that dreams for Freud are just this tool for him to pathologize his patients. They're not really a facet of psychical reality through which his patients engage with their internal selves. They're just coded wishes. This brings up a really interesting conversation in philosophy and science where we ask the question, how do we measure psychic life? And can we bring the unconscious life into science? If we manage that, what metrics do we use? How do we believe in the evidence that we've gathered? And what purpose can that evidence serve, even if it is believed?
Consideration of the methods of dream interpretation will show why the dreams recorded in the literature on the subject, or those collected by persons unknown to me, were useless for my purpose. I had only the choice between my own dreams, and if I relate my own dreams, I must inevitably reveal to the gaze of strangers more of the intimacies of my psychic life than is agreeable to me, and more than seems fitting in a writer who is not a poet, but a scientific investigator. To do so is painful, but unavoidable. I have submitted to the necessity, for otherwise I could not have demonstrated my psychological conclusions. Sometimes, of course, I could not resist the temptation to mitigate my indiscretions by omissions and substitutions. But wherever I have done so, the value of the example cited has been very definitely diminished.
Science has this legacy of only considering things evidence if they are as objective as possible and surrounded by quantitative evidence. But the thing is, there are some aspects of lived experience which can only be understood autobiographically. When Freud writes about his own experiences of dreams in the interpretation of dreams, he does so because dreams cannot be perfectly recorded and observed objectively. In the scientific analysis of dreams, disclosure is necessary.
The act of aligning theory and the self, discourse, and life raises issues when it comes to the question of critical legitimacy, a matter that is complicated further for women and femmes. In 1985, the American literary critic Barbara Johnson wrote, "Not only has personal experience tended to be excluded from the discourse of knowledge, but the realm of the personal itself has been coded as female and devalued for that reason. For example, women's writing might be more readily taken up in relation to the domestic sphere as the site of the personal and the private, rather than the public sphere as the site where real politics and thinking take place."
If personal disclosure is a feminine act, then here Freud and all of science are in dire need of femininity. I find it hypocritical that the scientifically minded reader would explore the interpretation of dreams giving some degree of relatively uncritical trust to the accounts of dreamers because there's no other choice. But then other personal accounts of similarly complex psychic life are totally disregarded as metaphysical, hypersubjective nonsense. Like, I know myself internally to be feminine, but I'm told that this is incongruent with my God-approved bodily development given to me at birth. So when I honestly share personal aspects of myself with the world is like, oh, no, you're masculine because we assigned you that at birth. And I'm like, well, I would say that that's incorrect. I would say that I'm quite a feminine person, and I'm perfectly happy with that. And instead of believing me and being like, okay, sure, that's fine, the world responds by pathologizing and abnormalizing me, trying to police the ways I get to express my femininity. The other thing science loves to do with trans bodies is displacement. If my internal psychic self is feminine, it must therefore be a result of sexual abuse or any other myriad of internal or external traumas. When I open up to Baroness Dr. Cass herself, and if you're not chronically online or if you're American and you don't know who she is, then lucky you. But she is the lady here in the UK who led the recent anti-trans scientific Cass review, which is now being used all over the world to limit and prohibit trans medical care. So when I tell her that I'm feminine, happy, and living a fulfilling life, a disclosure that is almost impossible to verify externally, she says, I don't believe you. Freud readily declares his own admissions of dreams to be a necessity of science, but he also readily assumes the desires of women without speaking to them. He essentializes the genders as binary, and he creates a psychoanalytic legacy that, to this day, seeks to pathologize and often eliminate expressions of gender freedom. He also has the gall to be like, my experiences are science and everybody should listen to them. But then when women and minorities talk about our own experiences in our bodies, suddenly he's like, yeah, that's narcissism and you're just too like hyper-subjective and that should be not included in science.
The association between narcissism and femininity is long-standing and has roots in psychoanalytic theory. Freud associates women with narcissism by virtue of their gender. And yet, women are distanced from the very possibility of being narcissistic by not having access to subjectivity through discourse. Women are not given the freedom to actually be narcissistic.
In the same way, trans people are branded as narcissistic for checks notes, being ourselves. Cool. But we can't be narcissistic because nobody will fucking listen to us. The modern medical community will refuse to talk to trans people about our lives while happily listening to those who have detransitioned. So detransitioner experiences are valid and they're science. But then all other feelings about trans experience, all positive feelings about trans experience, and auto-theoretical accounts of trans experience are nonsensical rambles of a biased, hypersubjective group. But sometimes being hypersubjective is okay, actually, and maybe even necessary to expand scientific understanding.
Most of the cast review's known contributors have neither research nor clinical experience in transgender healthcare. The review incorrectly assumes that clinicians who provide and conduct research in transgender healthcare are biased. Expertise is not considered bias in any other realm of science or medicine, and it should not be here.
Let's bring this back to dreams. Dreams are petite little personal confessions, if we so choose to share them. And as is the case with St. Augustine's confessions, they can potentially get a little bit intimate, and maybe they will reveal things about the inner workings of our brains which make us uncomfortable. St. Augustine prided himself on living a pure life in his waking reality, but he couldn't control sexually impure dreams in his unconscious reality. He came to the conclusion that dreams are something that happen to you. They're not an action that you take or consent to. So by this understanding, we aren't bound to the occurrences of our dreams. They don't reflect who we are as people. And of course, St. Augustine wanted to believe this because of shame. This shame originated and predominantly expressed itself in his waking life. His unconscious didn't have the same inhibitions. His unconscious was like, let's fucking go. In moral philosophy, deontology is where morality is determined by our behavior, not the outcomes of our behavior. And that, at least in this scenario, includes imagined behavior in our unconscious. So, deontologically speaking, if you have some crazy sex dream where you get a little freaky with someone you think that you shouldn't have, or you kill somebody in cold blood, you little murderous freak, your actions in the dream, in this very hypothetical scenario, might not be entirely what we, in the waking world, would deem ethical. So sorry to say, baby girl, but you're a sinner. It happened in your unconscious, but your unconscious did some behaviors. And the morality of the behaviors is all that mattered. You visualize those behaviors, whether they were real or not. The actions happened, and you are guilty. God damn it. On the flip side of deontology is consequentialism, where morality is determined only by the cause of your behavior. So consequentially, baby girl, I've got good news for you. Your freakiness in the dream didn't actually hurt anybody. It didn't physically happen to anybody else in the waking world. Because it happened while you were dreaming, it didn't affect anybody at all apart from you. So you're good, you're groovy, you're off the hook this time. Deontologically speaking, we are all sinners if we're bound to the inner workings of our unconscious visualizations and imagined behaviors. But consequentially, our dreams really don't hurt anyone. Some philosophers will even go so far as to say that the thinking and doing happening in your unconscious isn't even you at all.
If the same Socrates, waking and sleeping, do not partake of the same consciousness, Socrates waking and sleeping is not the same person. And to punish Socrates waking for what sleeping Socrates thought and waking Socrates was never conscious of would be no more right than to punish one twin for what his brother twin did, whereof he knew nothing.
According to John Locke's dayman and nightman theory, we are only the same person and the same identity if our memories are the same. So if I share the memories as Socrates, then I am Socrates. In the same way, if I do not remember what I dreamed, then my dreamed self or night self is an entirely different person. This can be particularly true in the case of somebody who does things in their dream while completely unconscious. So if you're a sleepwalker and you get up and you wander around the house, but then you wake up the next day and you don't remember that, and your partner is like, hey, did you like open the fridge and eat stuff at night? And you're like, I have no recollection of that. Well, according to Locke, that was a completely different person. That was your night self. Now, regardless of whether we're completely different entities with our waking and dreaming selves, the reality is there is some degree of separation, because if there wasn't, we wouldn't wake up feeling confused, disgusted, or potentially ashamed of the thoughts and actions of our dream self. And this shame is specifically tied to the day self. Even sat here having this conversation, we're only analyzing all of this through the perspective of our day selves, which we've already established may have very different values and emotional responses and shame responses to our unconscious. So we're biased. Our unconscious isn't ashamed of our behavior because it went and did all that. So, are you your unconscious? Was St. Augustine a mega slut? Are you gay because of that one dream that you had with your roommate? You know what I'm talking about. Or is our unconscious totally separate from us, consequentially irrelevant, harmless, we have no control over it, it does its thing, we do ours, let's not worry about it too much? Maybe we're only even asking this question because of shame.
It is in the world of dreaming that the unconscious is working out its powerful dynamics. It is there that the great forces do battle or combine to produce the attitudes, ideals, beliefs, and compulsions that motivate most of our behavior. Once we become sensitive to dreams, we discover that every dynamic in a dream is manifesting itself in some way in our practical lives, in our actions, relationships, decisions, automatic routines, urges, and feelings.
Freud declares the conflict of moral responsibility in dreams to be down to
whether its origin is to be sought in the normal functions of the psychic life, or in the somatically conditioned encroachments upon this life.
And that we are able to notice immorality in dreams only because
the undesired imaginings in the moral sphere are in opposition to our usual feelings.
These are difficult questions to answer, but it seems fair to say that the dream reality is capable of bypassing, at least occasionally and to varying degrees, the waking beliefs held by the dreamer. It's interesting to explore the possibility that the waking life of the general population may represent worldviews, anxieties, beliefs, etc. that the dreamer's unconscious doesn't have at all. So, are the values we have in our waking life the more honest representations of our values, or potentially are our more honest, real, genuine beliefs and values to be found in our unconscious?
Dreams reveal the true, if not the whole nature of the dreamer, and are one means of making the hidden life of the psyche accessible to our understanding.
This perspective would have us believe that our dream self is actually a more honest representation of who we are. It shows us who we would be, free from waking life censorship and shame. The dream can potentially bypass not just our usual moral sphere, but actually our entire political perspective of ourselves and our world. But when we wake up, we can't even honestly engage with the position that our unconscious selves may have been revealed a little bit, because our conscious understanding of the self depends on the power that created it.
The unconscious constantly reveals the failure of identity, because there is no continuity of psychic life, so there is no stability of sexual identity, no position for women or for men which is ever simply achieved. Nor does psychoanalysis see such failure as a special case inability or an individual deviancy from the norm. Failure is not a moment to be regretted in a process of adaptation or development into normality. Failure is something endlessly repeated and relived moment by moment throughout our individual histories. It appears not only in the symptom, but also in dreams, in slips of the tongue, and in forms of sexual pleasure which are pushed to the sidelines of the norm. there is a resistance to identity at the very heart of psychic life.
This isn't all to say that if you had some freaky deaky dream where you did something morally questionable, that you're a bad person. I personally will depart from Freud's philosophy for a second and just say that sometimes it's not that deep. Maybe you had a sex dream that was a little gay, and it doesn't actually mean that you're gay. It just means that our unconscious selves don't have the same shame and censorship and influence that our conscious selves do, and that's interesting. And then, of course, sometimes it is very much revealing something that our waking lives just don't really want to engage with, and that was definitely the case for me. Now, Freud talks a lot about how dreams convey these hidden wishes that are censored by shame. And I find this interesting because Freud is famously one of the greatest inventors of shame in our modern society.
What Freud's psychoanalytic legacy has done to sexual minorities over the course of the past 2 centuries is a comparable process of institutional and political extermination.
Freud established an incredibly successful psychoanalytic practice which involved a systematic denial and pathologizing of anybody who was queer or gender diverse in any way. So one of the reasons we today may have shame over a dream that's a little gay or gender spicy is literally because of Freud and his work. One of the reasons thoughts and behaviors and fantasies we're ashamed of work themselves into our dreams is because our conscious isn't always free to explore those things, maybe literally. Our waking reality and the oniric reality are bound by different laws and regulations. Freedom in your dreams could result in psychopolitical violence if carried out in the waking world. And at the same time, laws that prohibit your freedom to be yourself don't exist in your dreams. The thought police can't find you and punish you for having gay sex in your dreams, or for changing your gender in your dreams, even if those things are illegal to your conscious body. In this way, I think dreams can be a little bit utopic sometimes. It's kind of sad to think that your unconscious may be the only place you actually get to be free. But that internal playground of identity and exploration can still be a really beautiful thing. And what if I told you that you could choose to access this world consciously? What if I told you that your conscious brain could meet your unconscious brain and y'all could do whatever the fuck you wanted in the dream realm? There is a bridge into this utopia of our unconscious, free from the pressures and laws and stresses and shame of our waking life. This bridge is hard to access, but it can be learned and it can be trained. And that bridge is lucid dreaming. In describing the difference between lucid dreaming and being awake, psychophysiologist Stephen LaBerge writes that
the crucial difference is that the multisensory world you experience while dreaming originates internally rather than externally.
Not notably that one is real and one isn't. After all, a third of our lives are spent dreaming, with 11% of our mental experiences taking place in the unconscious world of sleep. So the dream reality is not a small reality, it's a huge part of our lives. And by lucid dreaming, you can actually essentially extend your conscious lifespan.
There are dreams that, because of their sensory intensity, their realism, or precisely their lack of realism, deserve to be introduced into autobiography just as much as events that were actually lived through. Life begins and ends in the unconscious. The actions we carry out while fully lucid are only little islands in an archipelago of dreams. No existence can be completely rendered in its happiness or its madness without taking into account anarchist experiences.
By learning to lucid dream, you can learn to live in a world where there is nothing external, with no laws of society or physics which might constrain your experience. So, not to brag, but I have lucid dreamt a few times in my life. I'm not exactly one of those people who can just do it whenever they want to. The conditions have to be right, and it's hasn't happened to me in a long time. But there's been a few moments in my life where I have just chosen to fly in dreams, where I'm having a lucid dreaming moment and I'm just I want to fucking fly, so I'm gonna fly. And then I've had moments where I'm I could write a better dream than this, so I'm just gonna change it. We're just gonna change shit up. And I've had moments where I'm like fighting like a bad guy or something, and I'm dreaming right now, so I hold all the cards, so I'm just gonna kill you, and I'm just like, get rid of that guy. So that's probably where I get my main character syndrome from. One of the things that I've done on and off for the past few years, and I've been really bad about it this year, but I keep a dream journal. It says dream journal on the binding, which you probably can't see from here. For example, like, I don't know how visible this is on camera, but you write the dream down that you had, then you write what it could have meant. In this case, I didn't write anything. Then you write how the dream made you feel, and then you can draw like a little doodle of the dream and the date. And it's just been like a fun little way for me to just like process what's going on in my unconscious, because she's a little bit crazy. Anyway, a lot of these are super embarrassing, and a lot of these I cannot read out on YouTube for reasons. But this one was about how I go back to my elementary school as an adult, and I'm going back to school wanting to see my favorite teacher, Mrs. Allen. She was great. I was really like into like fantasy games and shit as a kid. I had this whole like magical world I created, and so in the dream I go back as an adult, as a trans woman, and to like meet my childhood teacher and be like, look at me now. And then I like find the entrance to where this magical world that I played around with as a kid is, and I enter it as an adult. And anyway, I kind of want to write this story now, because it's very magical, like very Narnia, very like Bridge to Terabithia vibes. Under how it made me feel, I wrote, it felt like a magical trans children's fairy tale of nostalgia, like a period C.S. Lewis film. Anyway, so if any filmmakers want to commission that, I think it would be really cute. So apparently dream journaling is one of the strategies that people recommend if you want to deepen your relationship with dreams and potentially learn how to lucid dream. But that's not what this video is about, and I'm not here to tell you anything or to prescribe anything, because I haven't really done most of these things myself, and this video is just about the philosophy surrounding all of this. So going back to Freud, because we can't escape him no matter how much we may wish that we could. Freud believed that censorship was a necessary component of dreams, fulfilling this role to disguise the wishes of our dreams. But I think that this argument kind of falls apart when you have a dreamer who's living a life relatively free of shame. Like, if your waking world is incredibly free, then you don't need to turn to your dreams to find freedom or to disguise wishes. You can just go in there and start flying around and being whoever you want already. I think that Freud is right to acknowledge a certain power of dreams to bypass some of our waking biases and shames and to tell us things about ourselves. I do wonder if instead of running from our unconscious expressions of freedom, we can instead endeavor to adopt them into our waking selves. Our unconscious is this primal wild phenomena which isn't contained by the same rules of common sense and civilization in our waking life. Maybe instead of writing off our dreams as nonsensical ramblings, we can look at the ways that dreams skip past the rules of our world towards something potentially more free and less shame-filled. Like, dreams don't care if you're a Christian Republican or if you're a queer anarchist. Like, it's gonna give you what it's gonna give you. I think that dreams are one of the ways that we express our innate unconscious workings and leanings towards freedom, which is a fundamental part of being human. I think that as human beings, we lean towards a freer world, and we lean towards a world with less shame and less censorship. And so I think that dreams help us get back to one of the root aspects of being human and break free from all of the rules and regulations and hyper-capitalist perspectives of what it means to be human, and help us rediscover what we know to be human at our very core. Thank you for taking this adventure with me down the weird and wonderful world of dream philosophy. I know some of you guys don't dream at all, and I hope that you were still able to enjoy this video. Not all of us dream, but we do all have a complex unconscious world residing within us. I personally love dreams and I find them super fascinating, and I just love dreaming, and I love everything about dreams. But I know that for some people, they can potentially be traumatizing and unpleasant. I know that our unconscious can explore bad memories in ways that can be re-traumatizing. So I don't mean to gloss over that or to glamorize dreams uncritically. And I also don't mean to create dreams as something that they're not. I am aware that the script got a little bit metaphysical, and if you don't already know this about me, I'm a little bit of a fantasist. But I would like to say that I'm a grounded fantasist, and for the record, I personally do not subscribe to dream interpretation, pseudosciences, or prophetic dreams, or anything like that, and that is just my opinion. I would love to hear your perspective down below in the comments, and if you disagree with me, that's absolutely fine. Tell me how and why, and let's start a conversation. I'm gonna eat my fingies. I'm just gonna eat my fingies. Can I pet you? Thank you again so much for watching. This video was brought to you by my patrons, my very, very, very lovely patrons. So I would like to say an extra big thank you to each and every one of you in this part of this video. I currently am not anywhere close to being able to do YouTube full time. And that's my dream. That's what I would really love to be able to do. Luckily, my patrons make it so that I'm able to afford to put on these productions currently, and I just cannot even begin to articulate how incredibly grateful I am. So, along with being a YouTube content creator, I am also a consumer, and one of my favorite genres of YouTube is ASMR, and I figured this is a very appropriate video to do some ASMR on to help you guys relax and to help facilitate some dreaming. If you would like to join my Patreon and help support me continuing to make videos like this one, you can do that over at patreon.com/mqburgles. That's patreon.com/mqburgles. And now I would like to thank each of my patrons individually, starting with Lexi, Adele, Rick, Elijah, Newer Salim, Jules, Leslie Webb, Esther, Nathan Whitehead, Nicole Jira, Quinley Rose, Ree Fournier, Iridum, Chiffon McDougall, Dan, Matt, Julie, Leona Lux, Aurelia, Ingmarie, Erica Peterson, Rue, Maya, Richard Brady, Chica 898, Kaylin Zephyr, Olive Smith, Denny K, Alec, Catherine Carter, Arlen, Meow Pow, Julie Ducovano, Michael DiMarco, Michael Krautz, Bo Ia, Izzy Grasaf, Cy Starkman, Jim Schofield, Salem Heidemann,
Auspa, Feline Femby, Eddie Green, Andromeda Turnbull, Nick West, Emmanuel S, Tesserath, Kevin Bruce, Jordan Max Brian Inglekirk, Issy Long, Trin, Gary Richardson, Merlin DPL, Sam Colham, Lane Wright. I would like to once again say an enormously big thank you to each and every one of you. You truly facilitate me being able to do what I love to do, and it is really, really, really a gift. If you don't like ASMR, I'm so sorry. Thank you again so much for watching, and sweet dreams. Sweet dreams. Sweet dreams. Sweet, 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 sweet. Dreams, 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 dreams. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. So stupid.